So, welcome to the first podcast. We're going to be talking today about standards. And so, this is for the week 2 class prep. So, starting off first, why do we need academic standards? So, really, some of the main reasons for our academic standards, we need to check to make sure that our students are learning what they're supposed to learn at a particular level. So, within each grade, there are certain things that students have to know before they can go to the next grade level. And this is a way of keeping things consistent throughout your state or throughout your country, whatever it may be, and how you apply the standards. The other reason why we have standards is we're better able to really clearly measure our student outcomes. So we can say, yes, my students know how to count from 1 to 10, or yes, my students understand, the different characteristics of the Civil War. So here are two quotes that kind of really do a nice job of synthesizing that. So first, the standards-based economic reform, setting high standards and establishing measurable goals, will improve student outcomes. So that means that if we can say this is what all students need to achieve by time that they leave first grade or by time that they leave 8th grade mathematics or whatever it may be, we're better able to say, how do we measure that? How do we make sure that this is happening? How do we establish high standards across the board, regardless of what city you may be in or context? So that's a really important thing to kind of establish, and one of the reasons why we have the academic standards. And then the other thing is, within the United States, we're very focused on states' rights. So making sure that each state has its own identity in terms of education, how they want to enforce things, because things change from state to state. So what this is a quote of is, whatever each state decides students will learn. So let's say at first grade they must learn, basic additions with single digits. That's something that they have to learn. So every school within the state has to prove that students are learning this. So this is a way to keep things accountable and make sure that everybody's getting equal access to education. So again, this is why academic standards are so critically important. So what are standards and why should we care? So again, as a teacher, you need to make sure that your students are meeting these particular academic standards before they leave your classroom. So we in the state of Indiana have very specific academic standards, and this changed from Common Core standards. So Common Core standards are applicable to a lot of different grade levels, not different grade levels. It's applicable to a lot of different states. So various states have signed on to Common Core standards, showcasing that the standards that we have in the state, or that the state of Michigan has, are similar to the state of Illinois. So that was a way to be consistent. However, there are states that have decided we're going to move away from the Common Core standards and establish our own standards again. So Indiana is one of those states. So we have a link here to the Indiana academic standards, and I encourage you to go and explore those as you move along. Or maybe even as you're listening to this talk. And if you plan on teaching in Illinois or New York or Wisconsin or other places, you can click on the Common Core standards to explore those for your particular grade level. They're very similar. I will say that the reason that Indiana established their own academic standards was, in their own words, because they thought the Common Core standards were not as rigorous as the ones that they had before. So they established their own academic standards. Don't know whether we believe that or not, but that is what they say. No Child Left Behind was something that was established in 2001, and this is just currently changing. I'm going to talk about those changes in just a minute. But this was a particular act that talked about how schools would basically be held accountable. So when measured by the standardized tests, if their students weren't meeting those particular academic standards, they would receive a grade of A through F. And so in what we've recently had in the state of Indiana is in 2014, 2015, the test company that was assigned to actually grade our tests incorrectly scored the tests, and the tests were incredibly low. So this year, in particular, Governor Pence has decided that there is just going to be a pause in accountability because the tests were so poorly done. So the No Child Left Behind Act, which started in 2001 and is in place until 2016, the year 2016-17, is basically that states must develop their own accountability systems. Largely, these have been based on standardized tests. So teacher evaluations were really tied to these tests. In the state of Indiana, it's called the I-STEP tests. And what schools needed to do is make sure that they were making adequate yearly progress in standardized test scores. So each year, if you have a group of third graders that, let's say, the average score is a 70% on math and reading, next year, your following group of third graders, you should get them to a 71%. The following year after that is a 72%, and so on and so forth. It needs to continue to go up. And those that aren't are put on a list of failing schools, and parents have the ability to transfer their schools to other schools. There have been there have been some updates on No Child Left Behind. This is what it looked like in 2001. There are some small changes, but this is the general idea. All teachers must be highly qualified, meaning that they need to actually have a degree in education in the different courses that they would be teaching. And schools must use scientifically based practices and methods. And the other stipulation in No Child Left Behind was students must be technology literate by 8th grade. Now, this is changed in the new act, which is Every Student Succeeds Act. And in this act, what's basically happened is the national government has kind of eased off and allowed a lot more state input and state personalization. But they do have some requirements. The first requirement is that you test students in reading and math in grades 3 through 8. So that means in every year, students will be tested in their reading and math starting in grade 3 until they're in 8th grade. The next thing is that they need to test students in reading and math at least one time during their high school career, and that can depend, again, on the state. The state then also has to break down data for whole schools, saying this is how one whole school performed. Plus, they also have to do subgroups like English as a second language learner students, special education, minorities, and poverty. So that's so that we can just kind of get a feel of our subgroups kind of being identified differently or what's happening here. The nice part is that states do get wide discretion in terms of setting goals, and they can decide what they want to hold schools and districts accountable for, as well as how to intervene in low-performing schools. So the bottom 5% of all schools, along with high schools that have really high dropout rates, have to have some kind of intervention, but it's up to the states to decide how they want to do that. And then accountability. So test results will still be required for teacher accountability and teacher evaluation, but at least one other factor must be included. At certain high schools with low, so for high schools, one of the things that's required is graduation dropout rates. That's one of the required factors, but you can do other things like school environment, educator engagement, student engagement, attendance, a lot of different things that the state can decide how is this actually going to be put into place. And again, this starts in 2016, 2017. The Common Core standards, like I was talking about before, the states that are in yellow are the states that have decided not to adopt the Common Core standards, and all the states that are in green are the ones that have decided to adopt Common Core standards and tests. So that might be another thing for you to kind of look at, deciding where you're going to be teaching as you kind of look and decipher these different standards. But regardless of what standards you're using, if it's the Indiana State Standards or the Common Core Standards, standards basically outline what a student needs to know, understand, and be able to do at the end of that particular grade level. Academic standards can also affect our use of technology and how to adapt to all this different kinds of shift. So the Indiana Academic Standards, the technology that we use can help us meet those standards more efficiently or demonstrate how our students can better meet those standards. The other great thing about it is you can identify different resources based on those standards. So if I'm selecting something based on standard 3.2.1, I know that somebody else is trying to get to that same standard. So it's a really nice way to share resources. I want to show you what the Indiana Academic Standards Resource Hub looks like. And so this is the actual standards hub here. So if we click on, here's the previous year's archive. So down below here are all the different types of resources that you can look at. So let's say we look at mathematics. And we want to look at, so the standards are up here. You can download all the different PDFs for whatever grade level you want to. And then the other great thing that Indiana provides is these the resource guides. So you can pick a particular grade, and there are they list good websites for mathematics up at the top. So that's a really nice, helpful hint. But then they also provide information here. So here's the standard, but then they kind of help dissect it. So what are the highlighted vocabulary words from that particular standard? So they explain it, and then they even give some really great examples of what this might look like, as well as some electronic resources for that particular standard. So that's a great place to start understanding, what does this mean? What does this really look like? Because sometimes it's difficult to really understand what are they trying to say based on this standard. So what do the numbered parts mean of a standard mean? So here's one example of the third grade science standard. So at the third grade level, so the first number is always what grade level it's at. They were supposed to make sketches and write descriptions to aid in explaining procedures or ideas. So the first number is always the grade level. If it's something generic like psychology, it'll have the letters usually right here to abbreviate for it as opposed to a grade level. Then the second number is what set. So there are usually a couple of different sets in each grade level. So for science, I think at the third grade level, there must be 5 or 6 of them. So this is the second set, which is scientific thinking. And then under scientific thinking, there are multiple standards within that particular category or set. So this is the 6th standard within that particular set. So that's a way to understand what those numbers actually mean. And the next thing is, what do the standards look like in my area? So what I'd like you to do now is to spend some time doing 2 things. The first thing is to go to the Indiana Academic Standards, and I want you to look at the different academic standards relevant to your subject area and or grade level. This will help you kind of get an idea of, if I want to teach this grade level and this subject, what are the things that my students are expected to know? Once you've done that, I'd also like you to go to Symbaloo and add your link to your Symbaloo. If you don't know how to do that, don't worry. The TTL or your instructor can help you do that at a later point in time. What are your responsibilities regarding standards? Again, as a teacher, you're going to be responsible to make sure that all of your students meet the standards at your grade level. It's going to be a big part of your teacher evaluation, which could include merit reviews, being rehired if you're at the beginning of your certification. So these are really big deals, and you need to know what your standards are. And one of the other big things that you need to know is finding a way to document that your students are meeting those standards. Technology tools can really help with that, and we're going to be looking at some of these throughout the semester. So what's the relationship between technology and the standards? So as you saw from the hub resources in the Indiana state standards, those are really fantastic. So there are a ton of really great technology resources there, and technology is one way that we use to share resources with other teachers and collaborate. And since your students need to meet those state standards, and since parents and administrators and even students have kind of expectations now about using technology, it's really going to be important for you to know how to integrate technology into your classroom based on those standards. And that's what W200 is going to be all about this semester. So I really look forward to working with you throughout the class and talking with you. My name's Dr. Leftwich. I supervise W200, and I enjoy this class fully. If you do face any problems or questions, you can always email me at left, like your left hand, at indiana.edu. Thanks, and have a great second week in W200.